What's going on, everybody? Nick Whalen, Alex Barutha here with you. It's the RotoWire Fantasy Basketball Podcast presented this week from our good pals over at DraftKings. We'll have more from DraftKings later in the show, but plenty of time to get in on some best ball contests. We'll tell you a little bit about DK Pick 6 as well. Alex, a lot to get to here. We're going to talk about some players that we may be interested in buying low on in season long this year. But we've had just a rash of NBA preseason games over the weekend. And I feel like 2 or 3 years ago, you and I would do like a 2.5-hour podcast looking through the box score of every preseason game. I promise we will not do that. But we'll give you some takeaways there. Want to talk a little Ace Bailey. Want to talk about what we've seen from the new look Boston Celtics. Some injury news from last week. Don't really need to go deep on LeBron. That was covered on some of our other episodes. Again, we do give you 4 episodes per week here on the RotoWire Fantasy Basketball Podcast, but we know LeBron going to miss opening night and beyond, dealing with some sciatica. Something I've dealt with, Alex. Not fun. And I'm not a high-level athlete, so I assume it's significantly worse for LeBron James. But we did get some news out of Sacramento this weekend. Keegan Murray dealing with a torn UCL, basically a ligament in his left thumb. This is going to sideline him at least a month, maybe closer to a month and a half to begin the season. And I think this is a good jumping off point because, for all the videos and podcasts that we've done, we've really not talked about the Sacramento Kings whatsoever. Oh. It feels like all the momentum that this team was building, like, what was that, 2 years ago? They make that run and make the playoffs. And it's just, we're kind of back to the Kings being the Kings. There are some names on this roster. There's not a lot of depth in Sacramento. So who do you think steps up? What do we see fantasy wise with this Keegan Murray news?
Yeah, they don't have backup forwards.
They don't. That's what I'm saying.
You're looking at this roster, and technically the backup forwards who are listed are Doug McDermott, Dario Saric, Isaac Jones, Nick Clifford, who's more of like a guard wing even, and Drew Eubanks. My guess would be they're going to shift a couple guys up, like put DeRozan at the 4 and start Keon Ellis, because it seems like Doug Christie wants to bring Malik Monk off the bench. But from a fantasy perspective, I don't know if this really benefits anybody as much as it just hurts Murray's stock.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, they have the, Doug McDermott, Dario Saric, those guys, they can kind of swing between the 3 and the 4, I guess. It's not like all of a sudden you're like, all right, I'm in on Dario Saric because of this. It's not like Keegan Murray's done for the year. And I think if anything, it's just a little bit more trickle down volume for Sabonis, for DeMar DeRozan, maybe for Zach LaVine. And then, maybe you slightly boost Malik Monk. But yeah, Sacramento as a whole, it's like I feel like we just kind of know there's a very defined upside for this team, and it's not very high. 35.5 is the win total for the Sacramento Kings. This is a 40-win team a year ago, 46 the year before, 48 the year before that. Is that number too low to you?
I don't think so. I don't really believe this team is very good. They're going to have major defensive issues. DeRozan's not a defender. LaVine's not a defender. Schroeder's not a defender. Monk isn't really a defender. I don't even know if I mentioned Sabonis. And they're not bringing anybody of note off the bench. I mean, this bench is almost as bad as, some of Boston. You look at Boston's bench, you're like, who is on this bench? At least the Kings have Malik Monk. Boston has Anthony Simons. It's just, these are teams that have very low floors.
But the thing with Boston is I trust them to get the most out of those random bench guys because they do that every year. It's like, there's Luke Cornett giving you really quality minutes. It's like, I think Boston's going to maximize that. I don't know if Sacramento will. That's 35.5 is probably a stay away for me. And they were what, 3 games above 500? I think after Doug Christie took over last year. Would it shock you if they got to 37 wins? No, they could also be a 32 win team. They're also a team, like you said, with no depth. Like if any of those key guys miss a month or two, it's going to be brutal. Right. And the defense is a liability already. And if you lose DeRozan or LaVine or Sabonis for any meaningful period of time, I think the offense is going to sink.
In theory, that's what you have Malik Monk for. But then everybody else has to scale up too, and that just creates just as many problems.
All right, let's do a little rapid fire on the preseason, Alex. Pretty solid effort out of Demin Ayton yesterday. Caught some of the Lakers-Warriors game. It was pretty quiet in the previous matchup against Golden State, but 14 points, 8 rebounds, 5 assists for Demin Ayton with 2 steals and a block, 6 of 8 from the field, 2 of 2 at the line in 26 minutes. Lakers win that game 126, 116 over Golden State. I mean, how much in general are you trying to take away from these preseason games? I know you're watching a ton this time of year. And, in this game, like we had Draymond out there, but no Jimmy Butler, no Stephen Curry, no Luka, no LeBron for the Lakers. So what are you looking for to kind of inform yourself for fantasy in these games?
Like you mentioned, it depends who's available. So if it's a situation like the Lakers were in yesterday, and the only real playmaker they have is Austin Reaves, the main thing I want to look for from a guy like Ayton would be, is he rebounding? Is he playing defense? And just general, does he look like he's in shape? Does he look fine? And obviously this was his best game. Still not a great performance, I would say. It was pretty good. That the assists are nice, but how often is he actually going to do that? So it's a pretty case by case basis, and I think the Lakers are a pretty extreme example with Luka and LeBron not playing.
Need to talk a little Ace Bailey, Alex.
Sure.
I'm very intrigued by Ace Bailey. Certainly what we've seen so far in the preseason. I did think he was one of those guys that could maybe be a little bit more exciting or effective in real life than in fantasy. But we now have 2 games under his belt in the preseason. Both of these, devastating losses for the Utah Jazz, but was out there, made his debut Wednesday against Houston, 31 minutes, 11 of 16 from the field, 25 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists, a block, and 2 steals, 2 of 5 from 3, 39 minutes in an overtime game on Friday against the Spurs, 8 of 13 from the field, 20.7 rebounds, 1 assist, 2 more steals. Ace Bailey absolutely looks the part. He looks a little bit smoother to me on an NBA court than he did in college. And some guys are just like that, right? Where you can even identify that often in college. Like, this guy's going to benefit from the spacing and things like that. And I think Bailey is one of those guys. He comes out of Rutgers with this reputation of, if he has the ball, he's going to shoot it. He's not going to be looking to pass. Crazy low assist rate. And he's got 4 total assists in 70 minutes worth of preseason action. So I don't think we need to go too crazy there, but we've talked about it. There is opportunity in Utah. And I know we initially projected him for something like 13, 14 points per game. I'm feeling like we might have to bump that up a little bit, but I also don't want to overreact to 2 high minute preseason games.
Right. And he's shooting 66% from the field in his 2 preseason games. So the actual shot attempts are 14.5 in 35 minutes.
Right.
And he's not getting to the free throw line. So, and Markkanen hasn't been playing. So it's just, I do wonder what's available for him. But I completely agree with everything you said, which is he should have the potential to be the team's second leading scorer. Yeah. And in the games that Markkanen is not there, these 22-point outings should be there. And I think the thing that you and I were keying on was he's kind of an underrated rebounder and defender in terms of he can at least rack up rebounds, steals, and blocks. And he's done that so far in preseason.
Let's talk a little Kel'el Ware. We touched on him last week. There's this kind of ongoing Ware versus Jovic debate as far as who starts. I don't really know if the starting designation matters to me all that much. And I mean, Kel'el Ware just continues to pile up numbers. The Heat played 4 preseason games in the last week, 10-9, 18-13, 29-12 against San Antonio, then 24-10 yesterday against the Orlando Magic. Not giving you a whole lot outside of that. 2 total assists in those 4 games, 5 total steals. You'll live with that. Just 1 block that came in the Spurs game. But I think you have to be pretty impressed. He's been aggressive from beyond the arc. He's got multiple made threes in 3 of those 4 games. Where have you been drafting Kel'el Ware? Where are you seeing the ADP settle? Is he somebody that you're willing to jump ADP for, or do you want to kind of wait and see a little more?
He usually gets drafted in the 80s, give or take. He doesn't usually go that much higher than pick 75. And I'm generally comfortable around him there because that's kind of where you're taking upside swings anyway. You love the 33% usage rate in preseason, although he and Bam have not played a minute together in preseason yet. And Spoelstra talked about that and said, I don't know if that's a thing I like. And it's like, well, come on.
You control this.
It's just, I don't know why it's not happening. So, I mean, that has me, I would say, mildly concerned. At the same time, he is not someone I think you or I were projecting for more than 28 minutes a game, to just be relatively conservative. And I think if he gets that, then he could easily give you top 75 value still.
Got a good question in the chat here on Brandon Podziemski. Alex, I know you're a bit more of a Podziemski guy than I am, and I certainly recognize the opportunity that should be there for him in Golden State. Not a team that really did a whole lot to improve this roster. If Al Horford and, like getting into a months-long negotiation with Jonathan Kuminga, it's like those are your two big offseason accomplishments. I'm not super fired up about that. Coming off a big game yesterday against the Lakers, 23 points, 8 assists, 5 rebounds, and a steal. Again, didn't see Stephen Curry, didn't see Jimmy Butler in that one. So take it with a grain of salt. But your thoughts on Podziemski?
To me, he's like when you're after pick 100, he should be one of the first guys at the top of your queue. And, it's possible he only plays minutes in the mid 20s on a lot of nights when everyone's healthy. I also don't trust Jimmy Butler, Steph Curry, and Draymond Green to be healthy. So what you're getting, I think, is a six man. It's kind of like a Nas Reed situation. You're getting a six man who you can start here and there, and then when his teammates are injured, you can get these boom games, and he could perform really well.
Yeah, he's a tough guy for me in weekly leagues because he just seems to alternate good game, bad game, good week, bad week. And hopefully that changes and he becomes more consistent this season. But that's always kind of been the rub with him. It's like if he like in the leagues that we play in, with the RotoWire staff leagues, it's like if you pick him up at the right 2-week stretch, it's excellent. You're going to end up dropping him. Somebody else is going to take the chance. And I don't know. I feel like I caught all the bad weeks for Podziemski last season. So maybe that is coloring my opinion. Question in the chat here from Manila Most Wanted. He says, do you have any strategies on approaching auction drafts? He's in a 12-team category cash league auction.
Broadly speaking, I prefer to build a balanced team, especially if you're in like a standard sized, 12-team, 14-team league. So I think the easiest way to sort of encapsulate that is I would try to aim for all my starters to be in the $20 range, which is generally guys who are roughly top 40, somewhere between like 30 and 50 in terms of what you think their value is, or their ADPs, I should say. And then for the bench, I'll do $1 to $3 guys. I'm not that concerned. I'll stream guys in during the year.
Yeah, well, I think you bring up a good point on the bench because I know you have gone with a too balanced approach in our auction league at RotoWire before, where it's like, yes, you have extreme balance, but you have too many players where it's like, okay, I have all these like $6 to $10 players on my bench who I'm not using all that often. And, when you have a 2-game week or you have injuries, that's all well and good. But if you draft a mostly healthy roster, you end up kind of looking back and saying, man, I wish I would have gone $2 or $3 more and upgraded a few of those starting spots.
I agree, and that's why I basically only budget for my starters now. And I think you don't want to. I think that a lot of people do. This is the one thing you have to be careful when you do a balance build is you usually end up waiting, right? A lot of people spend their money before you. You don't want to wait too long because then you have too much money and you can't take it home with you, right? You don't want to end up with $10 at the end of your draft.
Yep.
So if nothing else, maybe get one guy in the $40 range. Like if you could get Cade Cunningham for $42 and then build the rest of your team balanced just so you have some sort of established floor and don't end up with no money left. I think that's totally fine as well.
All right. Another question here from DJ. He says, what's good, boys? What's good, DJ? Just curious what pick order you guys think is best for a 10-team head-to-head points league besides the obvious number one pick. And if I'm understanding the question correctly, it's basically like, where do you want to be picking this year? Which I think is always a fascinating question in any fantasy sport. So I'll ask that to you, Alex. If you're playing in, the NFBKC, for instance, you have the KDS, you can, get to pick your spot, but you can at least rank your preferences. You usually get one of your top ones. Do you want the number one pick? Do you want to be in the middle? Do you want to be toward the end of round one?
Yeah, it's not as extreme in a points league as it is in a category league this year in terms of like wanting to be the number one pick or have a top 3 pick. But, I think maybe like the 5th pick, because then you're pretty sure you're going to get one of probably SGA, Giannis, or Luka in a points league, and then you're relatively balanced on the way back around.
Yeah, I think that's the right way to approach that. All right, another question here from Adam. He says, in a points league, would you rather start Sabonis and Giddey or Cade and Sengun? Good one.
Probably Sabonis and Giddey. That would be my guy. It's close though.
Yeah, it is close. I'm trying to run the number. I think I would lean Sabonis and Giddey as well. Yeah, that's tough. I mean, those are two really good options, right? That means it's a good question. And if those are your two options and you're deciding between those, then I think you're going to be in good shape. I mean, Cade to me he's the best player of that group, right? So there is a case for that.
He is. Yeah. I don't know. I'm pretty high on Giddey, as you know. So
yeah,
I can't say for certain if Cade is like going to be a massively better points league player than Giddey.
All right, I want to talk a little Boston Celtics, Alex. We continue to see the Celtics even in the preseason when they're playing like 20 guys in a lot of these games. They're still playing Celtics basketball. They launched what was like 53 3-point attempts against Memphis earlier last week, put up 138 on the Cavaliers yesterday. Only a meager 45 3-point attempts in that game. But Anthony Simons looked really, really good coming off the bench, 21 points in 25 minutes. It didn't give you a whole lot outside of the scoring, 2 rebounds, 2 assists, 1 steal, but 6 of 9 from beyond the arc. All 6 of his makes came from 3. We saw Peyton Pritchard take 5 threes. Derek White took 7 threes. They played 23 and 22 minutes respectively. Quiet day for Jaylen Brown. Wouldn't take too much away from that. Just 8 points on 6 shots for him in 22 minutes. But I think this kind of goes in line with our idea here that no matter who's out there for the Celtics, one, they're not just going to punt this season, especially with this idea that Jason Tatum is coming back at some point. I don't think this is just like all right, everybody's hurt. We'll just use it to evaluate young guys like the Grizzlies did a couple of years ago. Like, I don't think Joe Mazzulla thinks that way. I think whoever they plug into this rotation, they want them to play the Mazzulla style. That means chucking a ton of threes. I remain pretty high on Anthony Simons, even if he is coming off the bench. I think this is going to be a really good spot for him to kind of change his image around the NBA and not just this chucker on a bad team type of guy. I think the Celtics will be competitive. But what I want to ask you is, how much are you upgrading Jaylen Brown this season with the assumption that Jason Tatum misses at least a large swath of the fantasy season?
Yeah, it's tough. I think that Jaylen Brown, he generally goes in the late second round in fantasy this year. And I think that's fine. My concern with him is that he hasn't been that healthy throughout his career. He's coming off a knee surgery. I'm not convinced Boston's going to be that good. And, he has his issues, right? He is not a great free throw shooter. I think Derek White and Anthony Simons and Peyton Pritchard are going to take a lot of Tatum's usage. Now, obviously, Brown is going to have big games, and he could average 28 a game, 5 assists and stuff like that. I don't feel like I want to be leveraged to him that much, if that makes sense. Like if I had, if I was drafting 20 fantasy teams, I don't think I'd want Jaylen Brown to be on 10 of them.
Yeah, I think that's fair. The free throw shooting is an interesting caveat, I think, in category leagues, because we're probably going to see even more volume from beyond the arc. So that hurts you even more than it has in years past. But I don't know. I'm a little higher on the Celtics team. I think they'll be scrappy. I don't like what is your win total target right now for the Celtics? Like, what if you had to predict how many games they win?
I mean, I think like 39, 40. I'm on their under. I mean, we talked about it now. We did an XM betting preview show, and I'm on their under because I just think they have no room for error. I don't think they can deal with like a 2-week absence from any guy on the team that is good.
Yeah, that's fair. All right. Victor says, good morning. Good morning. Should I drop Clingan and or Igor Demin for Tari Eason and Hansen Yang or Yang Hansen? What are we going with, by the way, for Yang?
I think it's Yang Hansen.
Yang Hansen. All right. Book it.
I would not drop Clingan under any circumstances yet. If you want to drop Demin for Tari Eason, I would say go ahead.
Yeah, Clingan to me is the guy I wouldn't. He's the one I want most of this group, no question about it. The other guys, we'll see. Demin, they're going to throw Demin out there. It's just a matter of what kind of learning curve is there going to be. We had a great quote from Cam Thomas over the weekend, who was asked, like, "Yeah, do you want to be kind of more of a playmaker, distributor?" He's like, "No, I'm just going to play my game out there." I think we can expect the same from Michael Porter Jr. So in theory, there should be, there should be assist opportunities for Demin. I'm not expecting big things elsewhere. Like, I just I think there's for all these rookies for the Nets. Like I kind of get what they're doing. You know, you have these two outliers in Thomas and Michael Porter, and the rest of the roster is basically Claxton and a bunch of young guys. I think this is going to be a really bad team. I think Demin is somebody that you probably won't like rue the day that you dropped him for Tari Eason.
No, and there has been a lot of Jan Hansen hype. Like I did a Q&A on Twitter and I got asked like 6-7 questions. Like 10% of the questions I got asked were about Jan Hansen. Who I think is fine if you want to draft him with your last pick, because I do think he is going to be the backup big and could play 20 minutes a game, but I am not rushing to my waiver wire to make sure I have him.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think you see what was that, Thursday or Friday? They played Sacramento, and he puts up 16 points, 3 blocks, 4 rebounds, and an assist, a couple threes. Like
I think he's good.
I think he's good too.
I think he's good. When I watch him play, I'm like, I get it. And sometimes he looks bad because he's a rookie and this is way higher competition than he's ever played in. But the more I watch him, the less I think the pick was a reach. And obviously it still was a reach. But
there's been a lot of picks that look like reaches that turn out to be good picks. There's also been a lot of reaches that turn out to be terrible. Bobby Giannis comes to mind. But no, I admire the Blazers taking a swing at that spot in the draft. All right, we'll hit one more before we have a message from DraftKings. 2 very similar values in ADP in James Harden and Stephen Curry. Who would you pick between those two? Really good question.
That's a really tough call. I think I'm more interested in Curry. Okay. Honestly, it's not necessary. Again, it's really close. The Clippers did reload. I think the Clippers are a more balanced team at this point and need Harden less. And I don't think the Warriors need Curry any less than in previous seasons, even though they have Jimmy Butler.
I think if you tell me both guys stay healthy, it's Curry. No question. I worry a lot more about Curry's health than I do Harden's. I know Harden's not that much younger, but at the same time, he has just a significantly better track record. Say what you will about James Harden being in shape, not being in shape. He plays games every single year and is wildly consistent. I mean, Curry's coming off of back-to-back 70+ game seasons. I hate to just say like, oh, play the odds on that. What are the chances that happens again? Probably not great at his age. So that's the thing that was, if you're just kind of looking to not lose your draft or your auction early on, Harden to me is the safer option, but upside wise, it's definitely Curry to me. Yeah. All right. We have a message from our friends over at DraftKings. After that, we'll hit a few more questions and get into some of our buy low players for 2025, 2026.
Listen up. Our partners at DraftKings Pick 6 have a deal you don't want to miss. New DraftKings customers, this one's for you. When you play $5 or more on your first paid Pick 6 entry, you get $50 in bonus picks instantly. That's right. Play $5, get $50 in bonus picks to keep building your slips and take your shot at big payouts. Just tap on the link in the description below to sign up and start playing. If you've been thinking about trying Pick 6, now's the time to get in. Just use that link to sign up, and all new DraftKings customers can play $5, get $50 in bonus picks instantly. Let's build some slips. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 8887-897777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick 6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. 1 per new customer. Bonus awarded as non-withdrawable. Pick 6 bonus picks that expire in 14 days. Ends November 3rd, 2025 at 11:59 p.m. Eastern. See full terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos.
All right. Thank you to our friends over at DraftKings, the presenting sponsor of the podcast this week. Alex, had another good question as far as kind of similar players, similar ADPs that I want to run by you. This one comes from Sun. He says, would you guys pick Reaves or Derek White in a points league? So Austin Reaves versus Derek White.
Probably Derek White. I would have, like I mentioned about Boston, my concerns about him being a veteran and the potential that they're going to be bad compared to LA. But White definitely has more upside, right? Because he's basically one guy away. Like he's, I guess their second option. I don't know how you want to classify Anthony Simons, but I'm a believer that White can scale up his game a lot this year.
I think it's still White over Simons for me in terms of the pecking order, but Simons is, if he is the sixth man, about as high level as it gets. And again, I think kind of a perfect fit for how the Celtics want to run that offense. I mean, how much does the LeBron absence to begin the year factor into this?
It should, and that's what makes it, I think, closer. I would still take White, but I would give Reaves like a slight boost. Like if you want to draft Reaves maybe a round earlier, depends on where you're sitting in the draft, right? How much you need to reach for a guy. But if you want to draft him a round earlier, I think that's fine.
All right, so the title of this pod, Alex, is 10 players to buy low on in fantasy basketball this season. So let's get into some buy low options here. I don't know if we'll have exactly 10, might be slightly more, might be slightly less, but I have a list here of potential options. Very curious to see who is on your list. I'll start us out with a guy I've talked about a lot in our videos and on the show already this season, Kristaps Porzingis. I'm willing to take the risk. I'm willing to bet that he will not have a mysterious illness that hampers him for half of the season. I know there's an injury history beyond that, but I think the discount, right now is steep enough that I think it's worth it. He's going somewhere in the 80s and 90s in some drafts, and I think at that point, it's not going to crush you if it doesn't work out. I think there's top 40, possibly top 35 upside for Kristaps Porzingis if you just kind of aggregate the numbers from multiple situations over the last 3 or 4 years. I know they have Onyeka Okongwu. I know there are other options in Atlanta, but I think Porzingis, to me, if you're kind of looking for a semi bounce back or somebody who's ADP, to me just feels a little bit out of line. He's the first guy on my list.
Perfect guy to draft if he, I think, is not your starting center in fantasy. Like two center leagues, he should get priority. 2 center leagues, you could bump him up even maybe like a round. Like Yahoo is 2 center default, and he's being drafted 55 right now.
Yeah.
But there are other leagues, like he's the perfect, if you draft Jokic number 1 and you can have Kristaps Porzingis as your backup big, sort of like a luxury player, then I love that.
Yeah, you're right about to point out the ADP differential. Significantly higher on Yahoo, closer to pick 80 in ESPN, going quite a bit later, even in underdog best ball right now, like, into the 90s there. So a lot of it depends on format, depends on rosters, but in general, optimistic on Kristaps Porzingis. I want to just address the 76ers here because I think maybe the 2 most obvious players as far as like name value versus ADP right now are Joel Embiid and Paul George. Do they qualify as buy low players for you? Are you buying either of them?
I mean, they do qualify as buy low because I think the ADP is very reflective of the risk you're taking. And again, I've drafted Embiid in 1 mock, I believe, and that was ironically a mock that I also took Jokic. So I was like, I can deal with this, right?
Yep.
And Paul George, I've drafted in a ton of best ball. He's one of my most rostered best ball players because he would go anywhere from like 80 to 100 in best ball. And I know we're still kind of waiting on, like, is he going to really be healthy to start the season? I still think there's a top 40, if not better, per game player in Paul George. So if he's at pick 85 in a standard league, I'm going to draft him.
I don't fault you for that. If you're looking at other guys who go in that range and it's like, man, do I take Keegan Murray or do I take Paul George? Do I take Bobby Portis or do I take Paul George? Like he can't be as bad as he was last year. Maybe he can. I don't know. Maybe he's just at that point in his career. But like that would be a dramatic fall off. And I know there are reasons we can point to for why that may be the case. But what about Embiid? Is the discount now appropriate? Because I think you and I agreed it was nowhere near appropriate heading into last year.
I think it's pretty appropriate. One thing that is hard to know because he played so bad last season, even when he was on the floor. It's hard to know exactly how much stock to put into that. Like he was one of the toughest projections I think we had this season in terms of, okay, maybe what if he does play 50 games, which maybe is optimistic, but let's say he does. What do we even project him for per game? Is he going to play 32 minutes? Is he going to play 29 minutes? Is the shooting percentage going to come back? Is he cooked? So I think if you're drafting him around pick 45 or 50, you're hedging enough. But again, that's easier said than done because there's going to be people listening to this podcast who play in 1 fantasy league.
Yeah.
And Embiid's going to be sitting there at 40. And if you have 1 fantasy league, do you want to take him and have that tied? So it's tough, but I think the ADP is relatively fair.
Part of it for Embiid to me depends on your league's like schedule format. Are you in a league where you have to lock in players for 7 straight days? In that format, it's a disaster, right? Like I've never had him in our stake league, which operates like that. Whoever has him, it's just been a nightmare. I don't think whoever has Embiid the last 2 years has done well in that league whatsoever because it's like, all right, he's active on Monday and then he plays Monday, he sits Wednesday, And then you go into the weekend, just like, all right, hopefully he plays Saturday or Sunday. And you half the time you end up with a 1-game week. So if you have daily lineups, I'm a lot more open to trying to chance it on Embiid. It's easier to time the market on when he's going to play. Weekly lineups, that's really, really difficult. All right, player in the chat here. That's the subject of some discussion here. Are we trusting Mark Williams at all? We're looking at an ADP around pick 100 on average.
And again, I think he falls into this bucket of guys around pick 80 to 100 that you can just grab for the upside. Do I trust him? Absolutely not. He is being rested for preseason because he's made of glass. And they've been Suns have been starting Oso Ighodaro, who has looked pretty solid. He's not Mark Williams.
Like yeah.
Yeah, I kind of like Ighodaro too. But no, I don't trust him to stay healthy. But I think once pick 60 comes around, you could start thinking about it.
Okay. All right. Well, that sounds like a buy low player to me then, if we're comparing that to the ADP. All right. I've given you a couple names on my list. Alex, who do you got?
Paul George was certainly one of mine. Where are you at? Well, I was watching the Charlotte Hornets play preseason basketball.
Here we go.
Miles Bridges looked great, man.
Okay.
I'm very confused by the team. And at points, Colin Sexton looks like their second best player, which does worry me. And maybe Sexton's a buy low, actually.
Yep, he's on my list.
He's being drafted 136 on average. So I would love to draft him with my last pick if he's there. But Miles Bridges still looks great, and he's being drafted around pick 60. And I can't say that he looked... I can't say that Brandon Miller definitely looked like the number 2 option on that team.
Okay.
In a way that makes me worried about drafting Miles Bridges, who I think certainly still has top 50 potential in his game.
Yeah, that's a good one. And his ADP is similar to where it was last year, and that's kind of why I left him off the list. But I think the basketball situation is better in Charlotte, so even marginally better than it was last year. Like maybe they just have a cavalcade of injuries again, and it's the same old story. And, Bridges is in and out for the last 2 months of the year. Who knows? But I feel like he's also kind of played through the tanking more than a lot of guys have. Like he hasn't been like Markkanen these last couple of years.
No.
Like he's still out there a lot of nights. So yeah, that's a good one. Very big of you to say, because I know how high you are on Brandon Miller.
I am. This team is very interesting.
Yes.
Like I've watched their preseason because I'm like, there's something going on here that I need to make sure I'm tapped into, because a lot of these guys are like hot fantasy names.
Yeah.
And like I said, Sexton's look great and Bridges has looked good, and Miller has been a little more of just a spot up shooting guy than I had hoped. A lot of times when they give him the ball and he handles, he's just not doing that well, which worries me a little bit. I think he still needs to get back in the groove after not playing, but I'm definitely interested in a lot of the guys on the Hornets.
Yeah, first time in a long time, I think you could say that, right? There's always been the LaMelo intrigue, then, kind of a step below that. It's like, all right, we'll see what we get out of Brandon Miller and Bridges. But I think they've built at least a fun team to watch, which has not been the case outside of LaMelo these last couple of years. All right, let me get back to my list here. Donte DiVincenzo is somebody I wrote down.
Sure.
I was big on DiVincenzo last year, and just got off to a terrible start. Like first half of the season, he was awful. And I think he's still being drafted at closer to that price. Overall ADP right now of like 132. He's going quite a bit later in best ball, about 130 on average in ESPN, slightly higher in Yahoo leagues. But I feel like he started to get more comfortable toward the end of the year. We started to see some of those flashier games from DiVincenzo. It's still running way more hot and cold than he was in New York. And that's kind of what you have to live with. But this team shed one of its primary rotation guards in Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and I didn't really replace him. It's like, okay, maybe you're hoping to get a little more out of Rob Dillingham. We'll see. I'm nervous if that's going to work out. I would really like it to work out. I don't know if it's going to. We'll see more Terrence Shannon, and I'm really excited to see what that'll be, because it feels like every time he's gotten an opportunity, it's paid off. But I think we see DiVincenzo absorb a lot of those Alexander-Walker minutes, at least early on.
Yeah, and we've seen him at other points have big games, and I think last year was an adjustment period for him. And some of it was just like the lack of minutes, right? Like you said, and there's potentially more minutes and usage available, and Rob Dillingham has not looked that good. Like not that ready to be a real floor general for this team yet, I should say. He can get his shots off because that's who he is, but so like DiVincenzo's usage was not actually that bad that last season. Per 36, he averaged 16, 5, and 5 at 1.6 steals. It was good.
Yeah.
So I think relative to his ADP, you're getting good value.
Well, he just dug himself a huge hole to begin the year. Like he was still playing. He was playing, 24 to 29 minutes most nights off the bench. But, from the start of the season through the end of December, was shooting 38% from the field, 35% from three. And then, started to show some signs in January. So like start of January, I'm just pulling a sample here. Start of January until we'll say the end of March, 45% from the field, 44% from three on higher 3-point volume. Like, so even if he settles somewhere in the middle, I think you'll live with that. But if you're talking about a guy who's widely available in the 120s, like that's where a lot of these drafts start to get a little bit ugly. You're not really comfortable with any of those names. You're kind of wondering what roles are going to be. Like he's somebody I'm going to be taking a lot of, I think, late in drafts.
Makes sense.
All right. Who else you got?
I was going to touch on Julius Randle a little bit, but I think we just talked about the Timberwolves, and I think he kind of is who he is. Another guy that I have been relatively low on in fantasy, and I feel like is kind of finally hitting the bottom in terms of his ADP, where I want to draft him again, is Brandon Ingram.
Got him on my list. I thought you were going to say Brad Beal, but I have Ingram as well. So
I've drafted a lot of Beal in best ball.
Okay.
But in redraft, I am more interested in Ingram, who has looked like the very clear number one option for the Toronto Raptors in preseason. A little bit worried about Scotty Barnes, actually, kind of based on what I've seen. He's kind of just running around out there at times. Not really sure.
About right.
Yeah. But Ingram has really stood out to me, and you're getting him at ADP anywhere like 70s to 90s, depending on your draft.
Yep.
And look, he's never healthy. He is only going to play. If you get 60 games out of him, that's a thumbs up. But he is someone that is proven to be a top 60 per game player, pretty much at worst over the past 6-7 years. And I wouldn't project him for like way higher than that.
Mm-hmm.
But how many other, again, this is the question you ask in this range, which is like, if I'm at pick 80, who else is there that's going to give me 20 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists, and do it pretty efficiently? There's not that many players.
Yeah, he's a guy where I think the discount meets the level of risk at this point. And he's not that far behind his ADP last year, but if you compare it to 2 seasons ago, that's where you're really seeing, like, this is a guy who are, top 40 ADP versus now, you could get him in the 80s in a lot of drafts. So I think he's a perfect name to highlight here. I think you're naturally going to stay away from a player who basically missed all of last season. Like, we've never even seen him in a Raptors uniform in a real game. So I think there's a built-in discount there. I mentioned Bradley Beal. We kind of touched on that, so we don't have to go deep on this one. But ADP on ESPN right now, 135. Average ADP, 122. He goes about 2 rounds higher in Yahoo, about 130-ish in best ball. I think kind of the ultimate buy low guy. Similar case to Paul George, but we've seen a lower floor already the last couple of years.
Yeah, and again, totally fine taking a shot on Beal that late. The one thing that is interesting to me is just like, how much is he going to play? I was watching that Clippers Nuggets game last night where basically everybody played, and the Clippers were not exactly short on like playmaking, and Chris Paul coming off the bench, and Lopez took like 12 shots from 3. Harden was doing his thing. Kawhi was there. So I think I feel about Bradley Beal pretty similarly to how I felt about him in past seasons, but that doesn't mean it's not value at his ADP.
All right, we'll close it out with a couple more names for you in just a moment, but we are also brought to you by Chalkboard. Cash in on your NBA picks this season with Chalkboard. Simply choose more or less on your favorite player stats to win up to 5,000 times your money. For a limited time only, new players get $20 free with no deposit required. Yes, you heard that correctly, $20 free just for signing up. See why over 1 million fans have already locked in with Chalkboard to turn their sports knowledge into cold hard cash. Whether you're looking to lock in the perfect slip with alternate lines, use the cash out feature to take your money and run, or hammering the daily promos, today is your chance to win up to $40,000 on a single entry. Stop sitting on the sidelines, get into the game with Chalkboard Fantasy Sports, now available in 30 plus states. You can download Chalkboard today. Use our code ROTONBA, ROTONBA. You do that, you get $20 free with no deposit required. So go check it out. Download the Chalkboard app as we get closer and closer to opening night. I'm going to throw you John Collins, Alex.
Sure.
He's one of my sleepers, and I think if he's a sleeper, he has to be a buy low, going around pick 100 in a lot of drafts. And look, you just talked about the Clippers, a lot of mouths to feed, between Kawhi and Harden and Chris Paul and Zubac, and where does John Collins fit into there? We'll see. Maybe lower upside to me on like a per game basis, but just getting out of Utah is extremely valuable to me because there is almost a tax on drafting any Utah Jazz player. And this applies, to the Nets and the Hornets and some other teams as well. But Utah is almost in a special category where it's like, all right, I'm drafting Lauri Markkanen, I'm drafting John Collins, but I'm doing it with the knowledge that I might have to trade them midseason or find a way to get out of this business at some point. And just not having to worry about that with John Collins to me is a huge plus.
Yeah, and the worst he's ever ranked per game is 124th, 8 cat. So, and it like in terms of if you're playing a points league, 1.2, 1.1 fantasy points per minute the past couple years. So if we're assuming Collins can play 28 to 30 minutes a game, then I think you're totally good drafting him there. I think again, his role is a little bit of a question on that team, but this is the oldest team the Clippers ever assembled in the NBA. Yep. So I think there are going to be a lot of rest nights and injuries and stuff like that where Collins can have his boom game, so to speak.
Good question on buy lows from the chat here. What about Kyrie Irving or Dejounte Murray as buy lows? Where do you take them?
It's really tough to draft these guys if you play in a 1 IR league. Yeah. I would highly encourage everybody to play in a 2 IR league, even 3, just because of the nature of these injuries these days. I think with like a last round pick, I'm totally fine with it. Murray probably earlier because I'm not 100% convinced Kyrie's coming back. There's been a lot of there's buzz. It's like he's coming back early, and then there's other buzz where it's like he's never coming back.
Well, our most recent update on Kyrie Irving is from like 2 weeks ago, and I'll just read you our fantastic headline here. At Media Day on Monday, Mavericks head coach Jason Kidd refuted the report that Kyrie Irving is ahead of schedule in his recovery.
Exactly.
Not a great sign.
Exactly. And Murray, Murray could, in theory, come back after the new year. If the Pelicans are bad, I do wonder if he will come back. Then maybe they throw him out there almost ceremoniously. But if that team is 15 games under 500 and he's coming off an Achilles and it's like late January, I don't know. Maybe he comes back, but then is he going to play in April? I think if you want to take him with your last pick or your second to last pick and then just stash him, go ahead. That's fine.
Well, so correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't the Pelicans trade their 2026 first in the Derek Queen deal? So they have incentive to not totally bottom out.
They have incentive not to bottom out, but I don't know if that's going to be their choice. If Zion gets hurt again, their bench is not that good. It's possible they're just bad, and then there's just nothing to do about it. Why bring him back? Why play him 1 minutes? No,
that's fair. I have to do some more research because I know the Milwaukee picks are still tied in with New Orleans, and there's swap rights and whatnot. But either way, it's not in their best interest to totally bottom out. All right, do you have any more buy lows?
I have 2. I've talked about Kevin Porter Jr. a lot. I don't know how much more I need to kind of hammer that home. Where he's been starting for the Bucks. He's the Bucks' starting point guard. And I think he's looked pretty solid in preseason. Now, he hasn't scored a lot, but his passing has been fantastic. Giannis played his first game yesterday. So I'm just in on Kevin Porter Jr. at his ADP, which is still surprisingly low at 99. I'm totally cool drafting him in the top 75 I felt like I was in a room that people are jumping. Then I want to ask you if you think this guy is a buy low, and that would be Nick Claxton. Who has an ADP of 105.
Yes, I think he is. Okay. I think we've swung a little too far on Nick Claxton, and the being on the Nets thing is a big issue for me. It's tough because what was that 3 years ago now? 2022, 23, when he had what felt like a true breakout season. The minutes were way up. He's blocking 2.5 shots per game. I don't really understand how he went from 2.5 down to not even 1.5 last year. The scoring, the rebounds were down last year as well. The field goal percentage, he was a 70+% guy a couple of years ago and was in the mid 50s last season. I would really like to think last year was just the worst case scenario. Like, didn't he get like a bunch of technicals early in the year?
Yeah.
Like, it just felt like it was like a bad start for Claxton and he never recovered. Again, I think he's a perfect guy to name here though, because it's not like, oh, you still have to take him with pick 65. Like, we're talking outside the top 100.
Yeah, he had a back issue and then was really frustrated at points last year. And you mentioned was committing a bunch of flagrant fouls and getting ejected. And the problem is, I don't know if it's going to be better this year. It's going to be, he's going to maybe do like some, light some candles and meditate and just calm down a little bit. But I think if he's going outside the top 100, he definitely qualifies as a buy low, which he typically is going in that range.
Okay, I got one more name that I've been saving here, and I thought you were going to bring him up when you talk Bucks.
Oh,
is there a case for Kyle Kuzma?
I know
this time last year, ADP of 85. Now we're looking at an ADP close to 140.
I've taken him with my last pick in a couple drafts, like real mock drafts, not best ball, and obviously I have a decent amount of him there. He didn't start when Giannis played yesterday. He had a good game, I thought, but I don't know. Some of it is you're almost like banking on a Giannis injury, I feel like, or a Portis injury. And I think he's totally fine as a last pick. I'm not sure I would reach much farther than that.
Yeah, it's interesting because it was like, all right, we liked him on the Wizards, and now with the Bucks, in what should be a better surrounding situation, we don't like him. And I know there was a ton of opportunity. He was kind of the man in Washington, and that's worth something. It can't be as bad as it was last year. I'm not saying I'm not telling you to pick Kyle Kuzma with the 70th overall pick, but I don't think you're going to take a major loss if you pop him at like 120.
No, not at all.
Okay, one last question here. Hi, Alex. Can you rewrite the article, the top 200 fantasy basketball rankings for this season? Will you be doing that?
Yes, I highlighted this comment for a reason, which is that my plan is to republish or publish our final top 200 cheat sheet on this Thursday. So that is the answer to your question. It'll essentially be our last, here's our top 200, sort of like risk reward versus ADP general rankings.
All right, there we have it. Keep an eye out for that. Excuse me, later this week. Alex, good stuff as always, man. We'll keep doing this every Monday throughout the NBA season. We'll be doing it on tip-off eve next week. 4 episodes per week coming your way right here in the RotoWire Fantasy Basketball podcast feed. You can get it on Apple Podcast, on Spotify, wherever you get your pods. And of course, you can watch live and archived on the RotoWire YouTube channel. Put in the code. You see it right there on your screen. If you're watching along on YouTube 15. Throw that in at RotoWire, 15% off everything we offer. Not just NBA, by the way. If you're looking to get an early start on baseball for next year, you want to jump in on some NFL content, 15% off with that code YouTube15. We want to thank Chalkboard, and of course, we want to thank DraftKings, the presenting sponsor of today's pod. Go check out DraftKings Best Ball, DraftKings Pick 6.